Peter, and thank you all so much for coming. We were just saying it's lovely to have such a good crowd on such a beautiful day, so thank you very much. So we're so lucky to have Sophie Ryder here. It really is an absolute treat, not only to have the exhibition of her work, all of us, but also her selection from the England collection and her beautiful dog, Pedro, who's been so well behaved. Good boy. We hope. We hope. Sophie, thank you so much for being here. So I think what we wanted to do was just to really start off, to set the scene and to really invite you all into Sophie's world, which is a really magical, mystical place. And this first image here is of your home in Ryder Park. Can you just tell us a little bit about it?
So we literally live in the middle of nowhere, as you can see. You can't see another village from where we are. This was obviously taken from the sky, but that whole green part is where I live. So my studio is there, and I have sculpture in it's a 20-acre park. So it's very useful to be able to have space to put my large sculptures. Otherwise, when I had a studio in London prior to this, and it was quite difficult to place my big pieces, but now, as I'm waiting to exhibit them, I can show them in the garden. So it's a beautiful place to live.
And this is an example of one of the pieces outside. Can you tell us how you think sculpture changes when it's placed outside a landscape?
Well, the thing is, it does obviously change with the scale of completely huge open field, you know, the sculpture. So weirdly, the sculpture actually needs to have more size when it's in an urban setting. Once it's out in the open, it sort of fits very well in an open space. I mean, obviously, the big pieces which are to the right are about 22 feet tall, and they look 22 feet tall in the field. But when you put them next to a cathedral, they don't. They look like tiny little sculptures. So it's a very different way of working for an urban or a rural setting.
So you feel like when they're placed in the landscape, they're not competing with anything else?
No, they don't seem to compete. But you do have to think about things like where I live, it's incredibly windy. So with the big wire pieces, that's not a problem because the wind actually goes through them. But with if it was a bronze that size, I would be slightly concerned about a sudden gust, a gale, you know, if we were having a gale. So we do bolt them down. Because we are very high, we're 750 feet above sea level. So we do get the real extremes of weather, which is lovely.
And it's so interesting because you've actually created that world, haven't you? So when you moved in, what was there?
So there was just a cattle shed and an old threshing barn. And we converted the cattle shed into my studio. That was the first thing we did. And then we lived in a caravan for 2 years. And then we started building a house. And then from that we converted the big barn. So we have 2 houses and a studio.
And this is an image of one of the studios. Can you tell us about, because so often artists go to a studio, it's not in their home, so that's part of the journey to the studio where you can almost get into the mindset. Is it, you've obviously deliberately chosen to have your studio at home?
Well, I mean, I work so much that I waste such a lot of time travelling. So I'm in and out cooking, and then I run out, do another round, and feed the dogs, and then, you know, so there's always something to rush back home for. I find it very difficult to work away from home. In one sense, it might be easier, there'd be more time to work, but I wouldn't feel so comfortable.
And so do you feel, so you mentioned you have to feed the dogs, you're kind of going in to get lunch and doing different things. So how do you think that domestic side of life feeds into your work?
Well, it's all such a routine. I mean, everything's a routine. To the last, like, I stop for lunch at 1 o'clock. I take the dogs for a walk at 3:30. So it's literally, the day goes like that. And I like that. And I feel, it all feels really wrong when something interferes with that.
Like today?
Yeah, but today was planned.
Yes.
So I knew I wasn't going to be working today. So I do have 7 different studios at home. So I have one really dirty studio, which is this one, which I can do plaster in, and I don't mind about getting plaster everywhere. The one next door to that one is a slightly cleaner studio, which I do wire in, because you can sweep that up. And then there's a drawing studio, which is very clean and dry and has underfloor heating so that the paper doesn't curl up. So I do go from one to the other, depending on the weather and, so...
Yes, I was going to ask you, so would you go to different studios in different parts of the day, or is it one day in the wire studio, one day
how freezing it is that day. If it's really cold. I was working on this, I actually made this piece in France, and stupidly, because I then had to bring it home, so I had to buy a trailer to bring it back, and I was so worried it could have been 100 pieces by the time it got home. So it's plaster, and I brought it back and finished it at home in the studio, and luckily it was October and we had the most ridiculously warm weather, so I managed to finish it before the winter. And but it's a piece, actually, it's probably the longest I've ever worked on a piece was this one, and it's to do with my family, my daughter's family. So when my girls were little, I didn't do that much about them being little babies and breastfeeding, whatever. It was so raw and kind of exhausting that I didn't feel drawn to it somehow. It was only when my daughter started having children that I felt inclined to make pieces about them and their children. So this is my daughter. I started making it nearly 4 years ago now. So she had a little girl, so that's the little girl I was standing next to. And then I just assumed that at some point they'd have another baby, and then it's a little boy. And they have a little boy in January, so it's definitely their family.
And was it always intended to be their family when you started making it?
Yeah,
yes.
It's definitely their family.
Yes. And has your family always appeared in the work?
I think it's just all autobiographical, really. Apart from a few pieces like Introspective, which is one of the only pieces I've ever made after a world event, I just felt like I wanted to do that. I'm not that kind of artist normally, but I felt like doing that piece because it really obviously moved everybody to such an extent that I felt I couldn't do work that was joyful and loving in a weird kind of way. I just sort of felt rather depressed and made a slightly depressed piece. I don't know, it's just,
Well, let's move on to the exhibition downstairs at Lightbox, and it's called, although you just said actually that the work is very autobiographical, this is called All of Us, and I think all of us can actually see things within the work that relates to our own lives.
Exactly.
So,
although it is autobiographical, I feel that that's one of the reasons I use the mask, because I don't want everyone to necessarily have to look at works about, it's like looking at my family album. Not everyone's going to be interested in that, but if they can feel that it could possibly relate to them in some way, then it's much more interesting, I think. So hence the mask, to sort of mask the person underneath, which would end up having curly hair and
You're right, so then we can go straight into that universality of human experience,
exactly.
When we're looking at the work and the feeling as well. So this is a really large-scale exhibition.
Yeah.
So how do you go about creating and choosing the works to show in this?
Well, very often, over the last 20 years, my exhibitions have always been like, I want to show them things I've just done. I don't want to show old work. So this time we thought actually it's quite good, some of the old work, so why don't we haven't shown it in 20 years, So we unrolled the wire drawings that had been up in the top of my studio for 20 years, or a bit less maybe, but I cast this piece which was actually made 20 years ago in wire, and then I made it into plaster and cast it. So, to me it feels like it's almost like a sort of retrospective. It's almost like a photograph album of my career in a way, because the pieces do go back such a long way, and there are so many different materials. So there's a little bit of everything in the show. That's why we wanted to put some tapestries and some mosaics, because I just love different materials. I love trying everything,
So as you say, it's almost a retrospective. It is a retrospective.
Yes.
And when you look back over, like, so you say that you were, rooting around finding wire drawings that you hadn't seen for 20 years. What did it bring back? Did it bring back memories of personal times, or did it make you think, actually, there are these constant threads throughout my work?
There are, definitely, but it just made me feel really old. Because I was like, oh my God, that's such a long time ago. Because I remember when I made them, and what I was doing, and because I was juggling, looking after my girls, and trying to get as many hours in the studio as possible. And so yeah, it was a bit like looking back, but choosing them, it was, I let Abby, who's my agent, she helps me choose which pieces, because I make them, I often, it's more difficult to be
Is it hard for you to be critical of them in a way?
I mean, I can tell if it's not good, and I won't want to show it. Usually if something's not good, I'll keep going until it gets better. But sometimes if it's done and then years later you look at it and you think, actually, no, that's not great. But having Abby, she could help me decide without being really rude to me.
So she's able to, together you can have a discussion about the work and what
so we chose it, and then we left it for a little bit, and we went back and filtered out some pieces. So we didn't want it to be a show all about the Minotaur, all about the lady there, or the dog. And at one point there were too many dogs, so we took some out because we didn't want it to be specifically any particular subject matter. So we tried to keep a little bit of everything.
And it seems to me it's a beautiful visual experience. It's really sensual as well when you're walking through it. The wonderful nature of sculpture really comes out. That the tactility of it, you want to touch it, you want to get involved. Children appearing up and down and around. That's what's so wonderful. But also, as we said, there are these important themes within it about the human condition, the complexities of human life. And you mentioned introspection.
Yes.
Are you able to tell us a little bit more about that work? What prompted it?
So I was at my studio when 9/11 happened, and I had a foundry at home at the time. I had 7 people working for me, and it was just such a strong. I have such a strong memory of that afternoon. Because they all had little black and white, which is so naughty, but they insisted on it, having little black and white televisions on their desks, so they would have TV on whilst they were working. And I remember I have Radio 4 on, and suddenly it happened and everything went onto the same news station, and it was so unreal and impossible. We all came out into the yard, and we were all just looking at each other, thinking, is this a prank? What is this possible? And it was just such a shock to the whole system. And being so far away from it in the middle of the field in Gloucestershire, it didn't feel possible that this terrible thing had happened. And it just made me want to make a piece about people being sort of protective over themselves or looking out for each other, sort of hiding. And it just came naturally to me. I didn't draw it, I didn't think about it, I just made these frames and started working on it. Since then I've done it in different sizes. I've done a smaller one as well. So
there's one here, this is it outside.
Yeah, this is the same piece outside. And I showed this piece in the Maya Sculpture Park in Oregon. And they said they had such a strong reaction to it from the people who had actually been affected by 9/11, that people were brought to tears by it. And so they commissioned me to make it for them in bronze. So they have it there in their collection, the bronze version. But I also showed it in Bath at the Victoria Art Gallery, and they said they had a strong reaction. So I was really happy that, even though it's sad, I was really happy that it had actually had the desired effect. It's what I felt.
It's just the strength of emotion, and just as you were describing that, thinking about it, it gave me goosebumps. I'm sure everyone else just remembers exactly that time, just thinking, what was happening, trying to get the news, and just trying to make sense of it all. And there are just the different human reactions there.
Well, exactly. And then to make it relevant to today, because it almost feels like you don't want to show photographs of 9/11 from, like 20 years ago, and then you're bringing it to today. I felt that having had again the earthquake in Turkey and the war in Ukraine. Just again, I felt that it was very relevant to that, and so that's why I added all the scrap metal.
Yes.
Because I wanted it to feel a bit like a building site.
That's what I wanted to ask you, the difference in presentation as well. So that's what's so fascinating about sculpture, I think. It's where it is, we've got landscape and now it's in the gallery, but also the additions.
Yes, so we put all that because it was all, how it looks in an earthquake, and the terrible vision of all these buildings just falling down.
And in the background now we've got all your wonderful drawings.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about the importance of drawing in your practice?
Well, I love drawing. People often say, what's your favourite thing to do? But actually, it's my favourite thing to do is to draw because it's so easy and it's so relaxing. It almost feels like, I haven't worked today, but it was really nice, but I haven't done any work because it's such a joy to just sit with a pencil or charcoal and draw. Even though it can be quite physical when they're large, I mean, you can probably tell that, if you ever seen the show, that the drawings are very big, the ones at the top. And it is very physical, but I love that. I love actually being able to completely immerse myself into the drawing. So I do love drawing, and a lot of these are very old drawings. There are a few new ones, but for instance, the blue one of the lady hairs on the sea vegetable, that was one of the ones I found in the attic. And the All of Us, which is the one that's on the poster. So, and then of course the ending, which was before I started doing the lady hair. So that's why she's got hair like mine, you see. That's why the mask came along.
At what stage in your process of making sculpture do the drawings weave in and out? Are they throughout or?
Oh yeah, I mean I have a sketchbook and then I enlarge it. I've decided now, because I go to my studio in France for 2 to 3 months in the summer. It's a nightmare bringing work back now because of Brexit, because they want to charge me money to bring my own work back to England. So when I bought that plaster back last summer, I was thinking they're going to try and take it away from me or charge me for my own. So I had to say, oh, this is just something I made for my daughter's birthday party.
Between us.
And they were looking at it and saying, what's it made of? Oh, plaster. And I was dreading, they made me unwrap it, and I thought, oh my god, it's going to have fallen apart, then I'm going to be depressed until I can repair it in the studio. So now I've decided that when I go to France, I'll probably just draw and make small pieces. In fact, I did make the 2 drawings that I've just mentioned in France, the 2 coloured ones, and the dogs. All the dog heads were done in France because it's just such, it's hot and it's nice not to have to be messy all the time.
When you're speaking, it makes me think of the sculptor Elizabeth Frink, who you obviously knew and will talk about your relationship with her in a little while. But she spent a lot of time in France as well and talked about the difference in light and how that affected her sculpture. And I wondered how you find being in France, the landscape, the light has changed or not your work.
No. I don't think it does. I mean, that's the weird thing, is I could be in a garret in New York and I wouldn't change. That doesn't really affect me.
So it's internal?
Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting actually.
And I mean, even though I love being in the landscape and people walking the dogs and everything, it doesn't affect what I do.
Okay, so you talk about your lovely dogs, and Pedro is touchwood still behaving beautifully.
Yeah.
There was just like a little Russell there. So shall we talk about the animals in your work? So can you tell us about this piece?
So that is actually the first bronze I ever made. So it's called Robber. Where I had my first studio, they had a lurcher called Robber, for obvious reasons, because lurchers do steal food. And so that I was always against making bronze because I just thought it was very commercial and I wasn't interested because I was 17 and I thought I'm not going to go down that route of being a commercial artist. So I didn't want to make bronze, and I didn't like the surface of bronze. I always thought it was too smooth and too old-fashioned, always very polished browns and dark greens and light starch you see in the cities. So I was encouraged, I should say, by the very first gallery I showed you called Corku and Corku to make some bronzes because my wire pieces kept selling very fast. So he was saying, it'd be really good to have something that you could have in an addition. So I thought, okay, well I'm still going to make it in wire. So I made it in wire and filled it with plaster. So that this one actually had, you can see the wire structure on the inside. And so that's how rubber came about. And then, of course, I started making bronzes from that then on. But that's why I add such a texture into the bronze, because it's really interesting to me. It's really satisfying to have.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the texture of your bronzes, because actually I think, if you've had a look in the show, we can pick out things that we've spotted, and there's all sorts of things. There's scavenged toys, bits of material. Can you tell us about that? So it's more about making the texture.
So I like to make the texture interesting, but also sometimes it's relevant to what's been happening that year. So if there's a new Prime Minister or new toy on Toy Story or something, just silly things, I add them in just to make the piece in sort of 50 years time look back and say, oh look, it's a Care Bear, or I used all my children's toys, but it was the first one.
They were still using them.
Well, yes, they were very the Harry Potter, I'll never live the Harry Potter toothbrush holder down. But sort of tools that I've been using that broke, interesting objects. I collect, as you can see from the scrap metal upstairs, I collect a lot of scrap. But
it seems to me actually that makes bronze more interesting to you because it also breaks down the hierarchy of bronze. So you talked about, when we think about bronze, we might think of it traditionally that it's been a material that has been looked up to almost, hasn't it, in sculpture?
And it sort of makes it more fun and it's still going to last forever, but it's got another story. So you see the sculpture and then you go close and you think, oh, it's got that too, and it sort of adds another dimension to it.
It's got that every day. It's got all of us in it again, hasn't it? All of our ephemera that we use all the time.
Yeah, spoons and knives and gloves. My daughter's hands, when they help me in the studio, I cast their hands into them.
I was just thinking probably one of them might be looking for one of their gloves.
Yes.
In a cold winter's day. And then here we've got some images of the plasters as well, which are just incredible, aren't they?
Yeah.
So the plaster work, tell us again, so the connection to plaster. So, obviously when you're using plaster it dries so quickly, doesn't it? So there's a real immediacy of working in plaster.
And that's what, I love the fact that it's so quick. And I do love working in plaster, but it's, now that my work's so big, it takes such a long time. But anyway, I love the fact that you can take away, you can add it, it's not expensive, so you're not thinking, oh my god, I just wasted 10 sacks of plaster and chopping all off again. So it's really nice for that reason, and it's so immediate,
Exactly.
I mix it so that it goes off really fast.
So you could be building it up, dry it, cut it back, put more on.
Yeah, I do that the whole time. I take away as much as I put on. Were you going to ask me about plinth? Because otherwise
Yes.
So I don't really like traditional plinths. Obviously, sometimes we have to use them because you can't put a little bronze on the floor or whatever. So I try to make the plinth part of the actual piece of the story. So the reason behind something like the barrels is that having never made a boar or a pig or anything ever in my life, I saw a dead boar in the fields, in the vineyards in France, and it was so incredible and such an amazing animal. I just couldn't believe that they still exist. It looked prehistoric. This huge head, which was the same size as its body, and I just felt I had to make one. Just then and there I thought, right, I'm definitely going to make one. And the reason they shoot the boar in the south of France is because they eat such a lot of the grapes. So then I thought, well, what can I put the sculpture on that will make it relevant to? So that's why the barrel came in. So I cast the barrel, moulded and cast the barrel, and same with the other one that's outside here, I think.
Yeah. And normally, though, do you prefer the works to be on the floor?
Yeah, I mean,
human height?
yeah. I kind of feel like they're more approachable. You know, the pits tend to be like make people think it's precious, so you can't go near it. And obviously, like I said, sometimes you have to have that because, you know, if you're in a very, very busy art gallery, people are just going to, you know, although I love the idea that people want to touch my work, if there are thousands of people touching it, the cleaners are going to go. And, you know, so.
But again, it's just about that relationship to sculpture, isn't it? So it's bringing it to our level, encouraging us in, which is so wonderful, I think. Shall we haven't talked about, this is obviously the key messages within your work, and you mentioned it earlier just about the masks, which is so fascinating.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about the themes of how the lady hair in particular developed?
Yeah, so I was making minotaurs from when I left the Royal Academy. I loved Picasso, I did Greek mythology at school, and the Minotaur was very much one of the first pieces I ever made. And it got to a point where I wanted to make a couple, and I thought, well, what can I don't want to have another Minotaur. It didn't feel right having a female Minotaur, so I wanted a female figure with an animal head, and I tried the hair head, and that was it. I didn't ever change it. It just felt so right, and so it felt like so me. And I've never felt like I've had enough of them now. I'll try something else. It just feels like they're my characters, and I don't know if I'll ever stop it. I don't feel like it.
And had you been making hairs before?
No.
So do you know where that came from?
Yeah, but it's a really horrible story. So I can tell you if you like. Anyway, my lurcher at the time brought a hair home, so then I drew it and then looked at it.
Ah, okay.
So
That's not too
that's
bad.
what lurchers
That's
do.
countryside.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about, I think what would be really nice to talk about now actually would be scale.
Yeah.
Because we can see downstairs there's all sorts of different scales in the work, and these huge monumental pieces as well.
Yeah.
And you also talked about the physicality of the work, which I find so interesting.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about how you approach making works on this scale?
Well, so normally people scale up. Well, now it's very easy for people to scale up work, but I've always done it by eye, the traditional way, and I just feel like I was, as a child, I saw a Picasso exhibition of small little cutouts, this big in paper, and underneath every single one it said to be scaled up to 60 feet, 20 meters or whatever. And I was thinking, I've never seen them. Have they ever been scaled up? Well, I don't ever want to be in a position where I really want to make big sculptures, but I'm not going to do it. So I always just go straight in and do a big piece. So I do scale them up, because if you scale up from this to 20, 30 feet directly, it inevitably there's going to be something wrong, and a mistake that big on the small version is going to be that big on the big version. So I do it in stages. So I do 4 scale ups to get to this size.
And you do it by your eye?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then, well, when we get to the very big one, we use a pantograph, which is, I don't know if you remember when you were a child, you used to draw with a pencil with this thing sticking off and it would draw a big
Yes.
So we use one of those, so it's a bit like working in space. And then you weld a bar, and then you point again, and then you weld the other bar. So it scales it correctly. But then when it gets to things like the head, I always change it slightly, so I readjust it so that it actually makes the higher parts bigger, because when you're looking up at the big piece, if the head is the right size, then it's going to be too small. Because, unless we're actually looking at it from the right, if we were 20 feet tall.
Yeah. And how do you feel our relationship with the piece changes when it's at that scale?
Well, I like the feeling of looking up at a big piece. I feel it makes me feel this big. And it's sort of, I feel like I want to make giant pieces, to put next to cathedrals and think, yeah, that works. I remember seeing a big Picasso tetraplan in where's that mile of sculpture in America? Chicago.
Okay.
There's a mile of just massive sculptures, and there was a 60-foot Picasso from one of those little cutouts that I saw. That's the only one I've ever seen, and it was so fast. I thought, God, I really want to be able to make a sculpture that big, because you can walk under it. It sort of becomes a building.
Yes, exactly.
And I'd like to do sculptures that are buildings. I'd like to make a sculpture that we can go inside. In fact, I've just made one. So, to be seen. So I love the idea that you can go inside and outside, and
well, that again is just what's so wonderful about sculpture is it's not just a two-dimensional thing on a wall. It's going to have a relation with it in all sorts of sizes. Go down, up, over, through, and hopefully inside.
Yeah, I mean, and with this one, although you can't get inside this one, you can see inside it, and there are two. Well, this one has a figure inside. Mine has 3. And it just sort of brings you inside, and then when the light changes, it goes completely opaque, so then you can't see inside anymore. So depending on, that's why I put it on in this field, because that field gets the light from there in the morning, and it moves back around, so that you see it looking completely different, so it can look like stone in the afternoon. And
so that the light is also part of the work, so it's constantly transforming in relationship to its landscape.
Yeah, definitely.
And also what's so wonderful, I think, about sculpture, about seeing how people like Mark and walked around and had that sensation of being in response to it. And it makes us question our own, the way we use space and walk around, and how our body is in space, which can be a bit discombobulating at times, can't it? But it's quite an interesting feeling, I think. So I'm just going to whiz through, because I just wanted to actually talk then about some of the works that you've selected in the upstairs gallery. So selected from the Ingram collection. And these are great images. These are just absolutely fantastic of you with Elizabeth Frink, who is, as you know, if you know the Ingram collection, we've got 28 works by Frink in the collection. Can you tell us about Frink and how you met her?
So Frink was my brother's best friend's mother, and they were at Chelsea Art School together. So Lamb used to come over every Friday night and play really loud music in our basement with my brother. And being 7 years older than me, I was not allowed to go down there. But I always remember seeing his mother come to pick him up, and with white curly hair, and she looks amazing. And I knew nothing about her being a sculptor or anything, and it was only when I went to the Royal Academy schools. She was a visiting tutor, not for me, but for the older students, since I was just doing a diploma there. And I recognised her and thought, and I just said hello. And then, so my brother had died by then, so I said to Liz, can I come and see Lamb? I had a terrible crush on him. He looks exactly like her sculpture. And he did. He died sadly with something too. So I went to stay the weekend there frequently. I'd go and stay
Helen Woodland and Dorset. How wonderful.
So, and I always remember thinking how amazing it would be to be able to live off your work. I mean, I was still a student, and so I didn't know I was going to be successful. I didn't know, but I always thought, wow, it would be incredible. I remember one Saturday morning she went out to the market locally and came back with this huge pottery bowl that cost her £20. I mean, this is God knows how many years ago, but I remember thinking, oh my gosh, she spent £20 on a pottery bowl, and she just put everything in it. She got back and she took out these paper bags and just emptied everything into this big bowl. And I thought, I want to be able to do that one day, go into the market and buy a bowl like something else.
And use beautiful things.
Yes, and she just had lovely things. She had a Picasso, and it was just in the kitchen, and I remember thinking, oh, God, this is amazing.
And so you were drawn to her work to select from the Ingram collection. Do you think there are synergies and similarities with the way you approach work in terms of the interest in animals and the relationship?
We definitely both have that interest. I think that her work definitely has a slightly darker side than mine. It's also more masculine than mine. We had the same work ethic. She was driven to work even when I was there at the weekends. She'd be working, and I was very sick with her and we watched her work. And she, definitely, but I never felt like I don't feel like I've been influenced by her. I mean, there are obviously comparisons of horses, but so many artists make horses, but I don't feel like there is a similarity in any way in that way.
And obviously there's the same interest in figuration.
Yeah.
And when she was working, she felt that sometimes that she got overlooked because there was a real road for abstraction.
Well, funnily enough, very early on in my career, I did hear a program on Woman's Hour with Liz talking, and she was quite annoyed about it because she felt like, how come all the younger artists are getting commissions and work and residencies and shows in these public places, and I'm not. I was doing figurative work at the same time too, but I was getting them because I was a new up-and-coming artist, but she wasn't. She was already established, and they were always like, oh, well, she's already established. But she was annoyed about that, and rightly so, because now, of course, everyone wants to have her work, and it was slightly sad that she didn't, even though she was recognised and she was selling her work, she didn't get the kind of exposure that she should have had in her work.
Yeah. And in terms of your interest in figuration, can you tell us about that? Have you ever been tempted to move into more abstract pieces?
It just doesn't feel natural to me. I mean, occasionally I've seen objects and I thought, oh, that looks like a sculpture. You could just cast that like a piece of wood or a tree that's died. But I had one on my property and it died, and I thought, I don't ever want to chop that down. I'd like to cast it in bronze, and I thought, well, that's not really me. Whenever I've tried to do something that's sort of either been done before or it's not figurative, it just doesn't feel natural to me. It means like it feels like I'm trying to do something different, and I don't want to have to try.
It's not in your language.
If something doesn't come naturally to me from what I'm doing, then I will just stop.
Yeah.
I go and become a chef or something.
And it's interesting though to think about that idea of a tree that's died is of interest to you, and that's probably just because as a sculptor there's really interesting forms there.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I could have used that tree with a figure.
Yes.
But not on its own.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Yes. So I'm just aware of time. You quickly mentioned this is another piece that you chose, which is by Leah Chapin, and you did mention earlier about the interest in motherhood now in your work, which you couldn't quite face when you were in the thick of it.
No,
as it was.
So when I chose this, I was looking at the pictures on the phone, so they were all this big, and I couldn't see how big any of the work I chose was. So I was just choosing things I liked a little and things that felt like home to me, like wood grains, just felt like, oh yeah, I'll definitely have those because those are part of my life. But when this one came along, I thought it was a photograph. So, and of course it's not, but it is very photographic. But it's just the feeling of the motherhood. And
you almost smell the baby.
Seeing that so kind of like, oh, I just want to kiss that baby. My daughter is like this now.
Yes.
She's through this stage at the moment, and it's just felt so in tune with what I do,
And then, so these are just some more images of the Sophie Selects show with Bridget Riley. There's a Kerry Richards in there. But before we finish, I just quickly wanted to talk about the work that you've got on display elsewhere. So there's this incredible piece at Wisley at the moment.
So Wisley obviously is a very beautiful garden. So we try to post, because I'm 60 this year, we decided to do lots of different exhibitions, and Abby helped choose some places all over England. So Wisley was definitely a good choice to have a big piece. And it was lovely there with the tulips.
Yes, if you haven't been to see it, I definitely recommend you go to see it. Yeah.
So they have 2 more now. Since this Wednesday, we have 2 more pieces.
And the last slide is a very beautiful work in Horatio's garden. I don't know if any of you went to Chelsea recently or you read about Horatio's garden at the Chelsea Flower Show, but can you tell us about
so
this piece?
This went in on Tuesday. We put 3 pieces in there. So I spent a long time in hospital as a child. With suspected leukemia, so when I was approached by Horatio's Garden to put some work in the gardens for the patients to be able to come out and sit in the garden, which has made a huge difference to these people's lives, this garden. It's beautiful. I mean, they obviously have to have hard ground and all the rest of it for the beds and the wheelchairs, but it's so important for them, for their recovery, to have a beautiful garden. And so I, of course, said yes, I'd love to, to install these on Tuesday. And
and already you've had wonderful feedback from the patients, haven't you?
Yeah, horrendous, it's a spinal injury unit, so you can imagine. But yeah, it makes the biggest difference to them. And when I was a child, we had one little garden, a tiny little garden, which we all used to pile into in this hospital. And had nothing in there, just a green space, but it's amazing. They have these hospital gardens, 6 of them now, and they actually came first in the Chelsea Flower Show, which is lovely.
It's just a testament to the transformative power of art and how we all need it in our lives.
Yes. Well, we also, one last thing to mention is the show in St James's.
Yes,
so
exactly.
has an exhibition in the centre of London, in St James's Square, if anybody's in London, which is a lovely show. It's a beautiful little garden right in the centre of London.
And that's not until the end of July, is it?
Yeah.
Yes. And it's all, and you mentioned earlier actually that the idea of sculpture being in competition with urban buildings, but actually here it works really
It works
beautifully.
so well. The scale, it's not the massive pieces, there's one big piece and then the rest are very human sized. So people go in there for their lunches and it just works really well in there.
Well, thank you so much, Sophie. We've been so lucky to have you. We can open the floor up to some questions now, if anyone's got any questions. Well, there's lots of questions. Okay, we're going to. Do you want the microphone?
Yes, I'll come fetch it.
Just for the recording.
Who was first? Should we do a front row?
Thank you very much. As a trained nursery nurse, every time I look at your beautiful work, particularly with the monitor and the hair, I always imagine that there's a story that's going on between them. And I wonder whether you've ever thought about turning or creating a children's book or children's books around the figures that appear in your work?
I have done. I've just never published it. So there is a story about the Minotaur and the Hare and how they met and what happens, and I've illustrated it. And I actually did a play. I worked in a school about 10 years ago in Cheltenham, and we created a play about the Minotaur and the Hare, and they wore masks, and we had the BBC North Philharmonic came and played, and it was an amazing performance. And it was all about the story of the Minotaur. And so now that you've said that, I'm going to have to publish my book.
Blame me.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I just have a question about maybe like a process or stages or materials. So there's the wire and the plaster and the bronze. And when you're creating work, does sort of one form pass through all 3 materials, or do different sort of characters and moments go into different materials, or does a wire lead to a plaster, lead to a kind of basis for bronze?
It can be any way around, and very often, now that I'm working on such a huge scale, I do tend to start with the drawing, because it's almost like you have to be a bit careful about whether it's going to fall and squash people, so you have to be really aware of that, and the pieces have to be very well balanced. So I start with a drawing, and then I tend to make a maquette, and then I'll scale it up. But if the piece really stays, and I feel like I want to keep exploring it, I will then make it in a new material. I'll just keep going until I've exhausted it, and even do it possibly twice in each material in different sizes until I think, okay, that's it now, I've done that, finished. And then I move on to the next piece. But yeah, you'll see some of the themes running through everything. But there's no particular order apart from the scaling up there is, but in terms of the wire or the mosaic, there's no order to that. It's just whether I think it would work in that medium. And sometimes I'll make a big wire before making it in bronze, sort of check that it works in the wire. because casting in bronze costs a fortune. So you don't want to make that kind of mistake.
But is wire and plaster still the basis? Like when you're actually physically making the bronze?
Sometimes, but sometimes I just make an armature in the wire, in steel, and then just start slacking plaster on it. So not necessarily. Sometimes it will start off little and then it will get bigger and bigger, and then I think I wish I'd done a proper armature. Because that used to happen a lot, where they just fall down. I've learned how to weld better now. So.
Thank you. George, thank you. It's lovely. Is your sculpture mark open? Okay. Your sculpture?
Not at the moment, because it's empty. Everything's out. But maybe one day. I'm kind of a private person, and although I do post images of it on Instagram and all the rest of it, and then when people say, "Can we come and visit?" I'm like, no. It's like inviting someone into my house. I thought what I'd do one day, when I have enough work in there, when it all comes back, I'd probably do a day where I can let everybody come. But as for opening that, there are people who do it. I've seen other artists who open their sculpture parts to the public, and they have to think of so many things. And when he told me the things that this particular artist told me, you can't have wheelchairs, you can't have prams, you can't have dogs, and you think, well, what's the point then? People are going to go for a walk in the countryside, they want to bring their dog, but of course you don't want some other dog peeing and pooing in your sculpture garden. And you don't want the wheelchairs and the pushchairs ruining the grass, So there are so many factors to think about. But it's definitely something that then becomes very commercial. Then you have to do proper paths, because my paths are all grass, but I'd have to make them gravel or whatever, proper hardcore. So maybe one day, if I become very, very rich, I'll put proper paths in
Yes.
Thank you, again, very interesting. You used to have a sculpture with the Hannah Pesha.
Yes.
Sculpture garden, which you go down the drive and it's on the left. Yes. It was just fantastic to see.
I think it was Lady Hares in the Forest, if I'm right. It was similar size to the introspective pieces, but with trees.
Yes.
So I made a sculpture that was had its own little forest, so I made trees for it. So it could go in an urban setting or a landscape. So, I think that was...
That's right. We had a lot of photos to that.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Sophie, how do you approach your work? Is it something that you think of and you just go and do it, or do you mull over it, or do you do it and then think you do it in a different way? How does the approach come, or the idea, or is it something that's done instantaneously and you get on with it, or are you working on 2 or 3 bits at a time, depending on how your mind works?
I'm working on many different pieces at the same time. So depending on which studio I'm in, what the weather's like. In the evenings I work on mosaics because I'm doing them in the house. I'm making small pieces in the house because I can make little pieces with sort of this plasticine that's clean, I do different things at different times of day and different times of year. So I don't ever sit down and what should I do today? I always know what I'm going to be doing. I don't go into my studio and think, what should I do today? There's always something happening. There's always a big piece of work. I have a few assistants who tend to be working, so I have to keep an eye on what's happening. So I'm a bit of a control freak, so I can't leave people to work on their own. So, but I always know what I'm going to be doing, and obviously when I start a piece, I don't know how it's going to go.
Ah, right, yes.
I don't think, that's what I'm going to do, this is definitely going to happen. It can change, and then I'll start a collage or something, and then I don't like it, so I'll put it away and start something else.
Right, yes, yeah.
Could I just ask, in 3-dimensional wise,
Yes.
amazing. But you do the flat ones. How do you do that technique of the flat wire?
So I start off on the floor, and then I put them up on the wall, so it starts off very, very light, and then I just keep adding texture to it, just keep adding. And they're very hard to read when they're up close. I don't know if you've noticed with the big ones. So you have to go back, and even my studio wasn't even big enough to be able to do that, so I'd have to photograph them and then look at my phone to be able to see what I was doing, because it's only when you get really far back that you can see. Yeah, it is quite difficult. So, and because they're so large, so you're working on, small areas at a time, so you just have to keep making sure that you're working a little bit everywhere, and then carry on. So it's just adding. If you look at them, they're actually about that thick. So the middle of the eye is where it needs to be the darkest, it's very, very thick.
You seem prolific in the production in terms of how many pieces. I'm just curious, how many pieces actually have you made? Do you even know? When I saw that tennis court in your video, there's so many.
But that's called Temple to the 200 Rabbits, so that's 200 right there. But Sarah, who's my PA, has been trying to work out how many pieces there are, so she'd know more than me. Did you know? Do you have an idea?
We're in full figures for sure. Full figures. Yeah, watch this space.
Yeah, one day. Things keep popping up, suddenly a auction, I see 300 pieces, and I'm like, they'd say, could you verify that this is yours? And I'm like, does it have a date on it? I don't always, so I don't always remember things I've made. It's always a surprise to me. Because I did start when I was quite